morning. It is a beautiful Monday morning in the summertime. It is June 6th, 2022. Welcome to another edition of Mental Health Monday. I'm Noblesville Mayor Chris Jenson, joined by the great, the wonderful, the gracious with her time, Kristen Boice, owner of Pathways of Healing. Good morning, Kristen
Good
Boice.
morning, Mayor Jenson. That's putting me way up here.
Hey, that's where you belong.
Hey.
Just go with it.
Hey, we'll see how I do then.
Yes. So, did you guys have a good week? The Boice family have a good weekend?
We did. It was busy, but
Good.
It was very good. How was yours?
Very, very nice. Wonderful weekend. We had baseball games. We had cookouts, went to church, just the whole 9 yards. We had a wonderful weekend in Noblesville. It's nice that it finally feels like summertime. Kids are out of school for a little bit, which has its own challenges. We can talk about that a little bit too if you want to today, because I know there are some parents that are rejoicing because school is out. There are some parents that maybe have little kids that it's not so relaxing in the summertime. All sorts of feelings there, but it was a wonderful weekend. So
we have people graduating, so that brings up a whole nother.
That brings up a lot of emotions too. I know there's some tears that are being shed. There's some happiness, some trepidation. It just all sorts of things. All the feels are happening this time of year, as they do all times of year. That's why we're here talking about all the feels. So, hey, a few things. Thanks for everyone for tuning in today. If you have any questions throughout this program, write them in the chat. If we can't answer them on the fly, although we're pretty good at that, we can circle back and get you an answer later, or point you in the right direction of someone who can answer for you. If you want to just say hi, let us know you're watching. That's great too. If you just want to sit and pretend like you don't exist and you just want to tune in, I get that as well. That's the beauty of all this here. So we welcome all sorts of participation here this morning. So we're going to talk today a little bit about some essential tips to improving your mental health, which is great going into the summertime. I think is incredibly important. One of the tips that Kristen Boice will tell you is to breathe. And so with that, let's start with some square breathing exercises.
Very nice segue. That is perfect. Yeah. Because this is number one. And I'm going to add lots of bonus tips today. So this is your bonus tip. Number one is the breath. So we're going to start with square breathing. So put your feet on the floor, or if you're outside this summer, just putting your feet in the grass, or if you're at the beach in the sand, or wherever you might be outside, that helps center you and take your nervous system from the past to the future to the present moment. It gets you here and now. That's why the breathing is so important, to regulate your nervous system, to self-soothe so you're not reactive. Your body returns to calm and centered. So feet on the floor, pressing into your feet. Get comfortable in your chair if you're standing, wherever you are. Take a big, deep inhale through your nose. We're going to hold for 4 and slowly release for 8 out your mouth. If you're dealing with any pain, physical pain, emotional pain, whatever kind of pain you might be feeling right now, breathing through it is a key. My daughter had to get blood taken, and I was like, we've got to get to the breath. And so using this to teach our children also to regulate their pain. So big, deep inhale. Let's do it together. Inhale through your nose and release. You're going to repeat that as needed. Usually it's 4 to 5 breaths minimum. Since we're doing this, we're just skipping forward. But I really highly encourage anybody that's listening right now, if you need some more breaths, take them. Give yourself that permission just to breathe, to come back to center and kind of regulate and modulate whatever's going on in your nervous system today.
Yeah, and at the interest of and risk of sharing too much, I told you, Kristen, I am in the process of passing a kidney stone right now. Got to go to the ER yesterday about that. So I was actually doing some breathing yesterday on my way to the ER, working through that pain. So it happens to all of us, whether you're giving blood or, in a painful situation. I was doing a lot of square breathing.
Yourself to the space is so important. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So if you are in pain and you're trying, or maybe you're having a flashback of some sort, or you're in a somewhat of a post-traumatic stress response, or you're in fight, flight, or freeze, orienting yourself to the space. So picking an object, like you just said, describing its shape, size, color is really helpful to kind of ground you to the present moment, breathe through the pain, and try to get out of that flight, fight, freeze response.
Yep. So with that in mind, today's going to be a lot of fun because we're going to give some tips, very practical tips for improving your mental health. I have a few notes myself of kind of what I do. I know I've talked openly on the show a little bit about exercise being important for me. Although the scale doesn't move that much, my mental health is actually really what I'm aiming at when I'm at Orange Theory. And so it's kind of what I do to release stress throughout and improve my overall mental health. But we're going to kind of go through several tips today that you can institute into your daily life and help yourself with your mental health. So with that, Kristen, I'll let you kind of lead us through a discussion. I kind of opened up about what my number one tip for myself is to move. And again, I've said this many times too. One of the things I've learned in the past 2 years from you is that anxiety and stress live in the body. So in order for it to leave the body, you must move the body. And that looks different for everybody. But that's one thing I have really has stuck with me the last 2 years is that you have to move if you want that anxiety and stress. I've had times when I've been super anxious. I'll be laying in bed because you're just trying to go back to sleep. And I just fester on it. And I have to get up and move my body to process that. So with that, I'll kick it back to you and let us kind of walk through some cool tips.
I love this so much because that's one of the 5 is you've nailed that. So we won't cover that too much, but mobilizing, if you feel stuck, if you feel looping on your thoughts, get up and walk around. Get up and move. I think you nailed that. So movement is so important to physical well-being and mental health. The less you move, the more you're going to feel it. So when I sit all day and I'm working with clients, I have to get up in between clients to move, even if I'm just walking from one room to another. That is so important. Okay, I'm going to give you the number one tip. I'm going to do it first right out of the gate because this one is least expected for people. And it's the one that is the most important. So there's research to back this up that says, and I'm going to have you guess. We're going to play a little game.
All right.
Isn't this fun?
This is great.
We're going to make it fun. Okay. For success, not only mentally and in the workplace and at home, what do you think the number one key is?
Sleep.
Sleep is on the list.
Okay.
Sleep is on the list. So you ding, ding, ding. You hit the board. I feel like we're playing Family Feud.
I know.
So sleep is one of the top 5.
I mean, breathing would be too obvious, right?
This is not an obvious one. So it's going to be hard.
Communication.
Communication's important. I'm gonna throw.
I love how you nicely tell me no.
Okay, so you're hitting all the important ones.
Yeah.
So here it is. You ready?
I'm ready.
So all employees, all bosses, all parents, all people need this. It's number one is self-awareness. Did you know this?
Oh, self-awareness.
To be a good leader, to be a helpful parent, it's self-awareness. Did you know? Isn't that interesting? No one talks about this, and research backs this up. Self-awareness is number one. Okay, why would self-awareness be number one? Because if we're not self-aware and we're just kind of going through the motions of life, how do we grow? We don't. We just go through the motions of life. It's like we're sleepwalking through our lives. How do we lead people if we're not self-aware? It's very difficult to do that. You're just going with your head knowledge. You're not connected to your own reactivity. So important as a parent, so important as a leader, so important as a spouse or a partner or for in any kind of relationship. Why do you have the reactivity in your body? What's going on with that? What's going on with your patterns of interacting with people and your communication patterns, your behavior patterns, your triggers, your ways you get activated? That is so important for you to notice. And then this is part of the 5 essential tips. We've already talked about sleep. That's super important. I can't be regulated if I'm sleep deprived. I'm kind of a different person. I'm like edgy. Everything gets on my nerves. I'm irritable. My brain isn't clearly functioning. It's hard for me to self-soothe. You named exercise or movement of some type. We've named breathing and self-awareness being key. And we have to be able to connect with our bodies to have that self-awareness. So what is my body telling me? What are these tears that I feel coming up trying to tell me? What are these emotions? Because tears help us. Crying actually helps us metabolize and process the pain. So when we're in pain and we're not releasing it, we're pushing it back down into the body. And people don't realize that tears help us release and mobilize pain. Doesn't that make so much sense? That's why children cry, because they release it and they're trying to mobilize the pain they feel inside. And we tell them, don't cry. I'll give you something to cry about, or don't be a crybaby, or why are you being such a baby? Those are things do not say, because you're teaching people to push that back down into the nervous system, and the pain will get greater. We will atrophy. We will stay stuck emotionally at that age. So that's why letting and releasing emotions, which is my number 2. So number 1 was self-awareness. Number 2 is acknowledging, processing, and releasing emotion. So I have to connect to what I'm feeling, which we're not taught as children typically. So I can name it. I can acknowledge where it lives in my body. I can process it. What does processing mean? Processing means I'm going to let it out. I'm going to either talk about it. I'm going to move it out of my body. I'm going to journal about it. I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to join a support group. I'm going to pay attention to it. That's what processing means. I'm going to pay attention to it. I'm going to try to tend to it, nurture it. What we have learned is we're going to drink it. We're going to take a pill. We're going to shop it. We're going to gamble it. We're going to we're going to fill this hole that I feel with something externally, rather than I'm going to nurture it. I'm going to process it. I'm going to give it the attention it deserves and it needs, because oftentimes our emotions make sense given circumstances. We've had a lot of traumatic things go on in the world that have been very activating for our community. We had a shooting that went on in Texas that was very activating for our community. And you had feelings come up. That makes sense, and it's okay. It's okay that you might have felt angry, scared, sad, disgusted, grief. That is all pertinent to what happened. So your emotions make sense given circumstances. And when we can start giving each other permission and go, oh, that makes sense. Tell me more. That is a phrase, if I can teach people.
Tell me more.
When your children start coming home from school and they say, nothing happened today, tell me more. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, Johnny today sat next to me at lunch and, pushed me. I'm making this up, but you get the idea. They start talking. So tell me more. They can or can't. That's not up to you to control. We don't control that. But we give them permission to share what's on their heart when they want to share it. So tell me more with a friend. Hey, I had such a bad day today. I am so stressed out and overwhelmed, or I'm so upset by what I'm watching. And you say, tell me more. That allows you to be present with the person. And even for yourself, when you have feelings come up, tell me more. Giving yourself permission to have boundaries, turning off social media, turn off the news. Like, we don't need to be drinking that from a fire hose. Like, if your body is responding and you're like, this doesn't feel good, turn it off. It's okay. So self-awareness, processing, acknowledging, connecting to your emotions is my number 2. I mean, we already talked about breathing, we talked about sleep, and we talked about movement. We've already got 5, and there's lots more to give.
Oh, yeah.
These are key to mental health, and we're not taught these. So teaching kids about emotions, knowing your own emotions yourself is important. It's critical to mental health. That's why I would love to see it taught in schools. We are now starting to make a movement to teach this to children as young as 2. I started in utero with my kids. We're like, okay, Mom, we don't really want to talk about our feelings today. That's fine too. So those are some keys. Now, we keep going. Here's the next part.
Sorry, I was having a little coughing fit there.
Yes.
Keep talking.
I get that.
After me.
Okay. The other thing when we talk about self-awareness that goes hand in hand is ownership, radical ownership for your own thoughts, feelings, and behavior. We want to pass the buck off. We want to blame someone else. We want to, when we're upset, we want
to tell them to take ownership of their own stuff.
Exactly.
We're just not owning our own stuff.
Yes. Yeah. And there's 3 fingers. If I'm pointing at someone else, there's 3 fingers pointing back at me.
Yep.
And it's an invitation for all of us to go, okay, what can I own in this dance? What can I own in this pattern with this person? Or as a parent, not to go into shame, which leads me to my next. I'm throwing in a whole bunch of bonus tips today because we all need them. We all need a little bit of self-compassion. So what's my bonus tip? To be kinder to ourselves, to be compassionate. So when I take radical ownership, it's not to beat myself up. It's to go, okay, how can I improve? How can I grow? How can I nurture these parts that need attention that might not have gotten attention as children? Now, again, not to blame anybody, but to be kind to ourselves. Then if I'm nurturing myself and I'm soothing that inner critic, I'm less likely to be judgmental of somebody else. I'm less likely to take things out and displace my anger onto somebody else because I'm nurturing myself through it. Does that make sense? That's one of the most important things that we're not taught is so when my kids get upset with themselves or they have the inner critic, I'm like, take it, I'll say, it's okay. It's okay to let it out and be gentle with yourself. You were doing the best you could.
So a lot of these tips are awesome for ourselves. And I think a lot of us are just naturally wired to not focus on ourselves. And that's what we're trying to break through here today a little bit about tips for improving your mental health. I would love to spend a few minutes talking about if you are just somebody who just insists on helping others with their mental health and you want to, whether it be your child or your spouse or someone else, how can we delicately, again, I don't think you're ever done working on yourself. So I would encourage you to start there first, but how do you go ahead and focus on someone else? And how do you start to breach that conversation if you want to work on someone else's mental health? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And this is where it gets sticky because a lot of people will come to the therapy and they'll just start telling me all about the other person.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I get that. And that if you think you just say it in a certain way or you approach the conversation in a certain way, then they're going to be able to hear you. While that might be true, typically what someone wants from you is compassion, understanding, and empathy. This is what people want. If they think you're trying to fix them, they're going to run. They're going to, and that might be one of your go-tos. Like if you grew up in an alcoholic family system, you might be what we call the parentified child, which is someone that's highly responsible, feels responsible for someone else's feelings. And so you spend a lot of time trying to help them feel happy or help them feel better about themselves or kind of want to fix. If we start out with a sentence in your head, if only they would go to therapy. I'm like, yeah, I get that. If only they would go to therapy, if only they would get sober, if only they would, join a support system, if only they would, etc. You get the idea. I'm in fix-it mode. So it's really important to distinguish between fix-it mode and just unattaching to the outcome of a conversation rather than controlling the conversation. So if you say, how are you feeling? I'm powerless over whether the person's going to do anything or not. So that's what I encourage people to do. Open up a conversation with how are you feeling? And if they say, fine, we've talked about feelings inside, not expressed. Tell me more. So cheat sheet, tell me more. That's the key. And then when they tell you more, if you start getting defensive, you're already hooked in to feeling. If they start blaming or shaming, you can set a boundary and say, hey, this doesn't feel good. So I'm going to walk away now, or let's put a pin in this conversation until we can come to connect and understand it's okay for us to see things differently. The key for this is if they feel like you are trying to control, fix, manipulate, they are not going to feel safe to open up with you.
So if you say, tell me more, really mean it.
Really mean it. Because if you're like, tell me more, and then I'm going to tell you how to fix that. Because they're like, tell me
about why you're wrong.
And I'm like, well, have you gone to therapy? Have you gone to an AA group? Have you, and I'm in because believe me, I would love to offer so many options for people. They don't really want that. Unless they ask me, what do you think I should do? I'll say, well, I don't know what you should do. Here's change the should to a could. You could. That's a different conversation because they're asking. Most people aren't asking. They just want you to listen understand and acknowledge. And that's tough for people because we're like, I see what you're doing. And if you only would do X, like if you would only stop drinking so much or eating so much or whatever we think the person's doing, then you'd feel better. That may be true, but they don't really might not want to hear it from you. They have to want to do that work. And that's tough for people. So that's when I go, okay, what can you, quote unquote, I hate the word control, but what can you control in the situation? You, how you're reacting, how you're responding. Are you engaging the same way you grew up? So are you engaging the same way you saw your primary caregivers, your mom, your dad, whoever raised you? Are you functioning, even though you think you're doing it differently, the same because this is what you were taught? Or have you swung the pendulum so far, you're trying to do everything the opposite way, and you're almost going to the other extreme? Like if you didn't get your needs met, you're almost meeting all the needs for your whole house. That's not going to be healthy either.
One of the things that I've realized is that, if you're with someone or friends with somebody that you think if you know the obvious answer to their problem, whether if they want to lose weight and the answer is, well, duh, just eat less, or if they want to stop, if they have struggle with alcohol abuse and, oh, we'll just stop drinking. If those are your responses, isn't it pretty clear that obviously there's something else going on with that person? I mean, wouldn't they obviously take the obvious step if they could? And so I think that self-awareness of knowing that, hey, maybe it's time to show some empathy and show just a listening ear, because if the answer is so obvious, they would have done it by now. Is that a fair statement?
That's so good that you're saying this, because people are like, well, just X, just,
right. Don't you think if it was just something, they would have just done it?
Exactly. They're struggling because it's a deeper issue. Again, like what we've talked about together, what we think is we're fighting over the spilled milk, it's really so much deeper. It's about unmet needs. It's about trauma that might not have gotten processed. And one of the things we know about trauma, it doesn't come back as a memory necessarily. It comes back as a reaction. So we think trauma comes back as a memory. It comes back. What do I mean by reaction? You have in your nervous system, you have an intensity, or you feel something heavy, deep inside, or an emotion comes out, or you get angry, or you get reactive, you yell, or you get irritable. That's because there's something deeper that needs to be tended to. So if someone thinks, well, just stop drinking, the person has something deeper that happened years ago, trauma that happened years ago, shame that they battle of not feeling good enough. It's layered. It's not as simple as A plus B equals C. We think mental health is that. It's not. It's an onion that needs to be peeled. There's layers upon layers there, and it needs tenderness.
Yeah.
It needs kindness. And I don't mean enablement. Enablement means I am continuing to allow somebody to treat me a certain way or do certain things that aren't okay with me, or that need, I need to have healthy boundaries, which is saying what's okay and what's not okay. That's a different topic for a different day. But really the key here is giving up that thought that you can change somebody, because you can't. And that's grief. We wanted our parents to see the light. We would hustle, get good grades, or be the good girl or good boy or good person or good soul, whatever that looks like for you. And we never felt good enough. And maybe we're still doing that in our lives. We're trying to get other people to go, oh, you're a good person. And instead, we have to do that work to believe we're a good person.
Yeah.
Instead of looking outside of ourselves.
So one area I want to wrap this show up on, because these are a lot of awesome tips kind of for internal and internal long-term work, right? Because mental health is a long-term process. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Janet Hart-Leonard, by the way. She chimed in here. I can tell you her release is to write it out, to get it out. She's a recent author. So I think she publishes an article every week, and I'm sure that's a major part of her processing is how she writes it. So kudos to her. But a lot of the work that we're talking about is really long-term. It's lifelong work. It's looking inside ourselves. It's but if somebody, for example, is on that long-term train, right, but is having a short-term, not issue, but if they wake up one morning and they're just having a bad day, they're in a dark space, they know that this day is not good. Can we maybe talk about some triggers within society? I'm thinking like social media and those type of things. Like, what can I do? Like, hey, I know I'm on high alert today on myself because I'm aware of myself, self-awareness being number one. What can I do today to kind of rein in the outside influences that might make it worse? Does that question sound fair?
Yeah, it does. Because we're like, what's the applicable steps today? If I'm in the dark abyss, I'm in a dark hole, which we can get into. First of all, I would say do something that brings you joy. And a lot of people don't even know what that is. Like, they're like, I don't even know. Maybe some music. It might be a podcast. It might be a movie that you really like. It might be listening to something that speaks to you. Social media can activate a lot of that shame of comparison, not feeling good enough. And typically, not always, I don't like to use absolutes. I recommend getting off of social media, reaching out to a friend. If you're like, well, I don't really have a friend, you can always call 1-800-273-TALK if you're in a suicidal place or you're having suicidal thoughts. They are wonderful there. They will walk you through steps to help you with that thought, those thoughts that are just kind of torturing you. The other thing is get up and move. So we kind of want to lay in bed, and sometimes that's good. We need a little lay in bed time. Oftentimes we need to get up, take several deep breaths, move around, go outside, ground yourself. We kind of talked about this. Hug a tree. I know that sounds like, oh my gosh, she's saying hug a tree. There's something about nature that can help you come back to center. So walking in the grass, yoga is very helpful. Listening to something that tells you truths, that you are worthy, that you are enough, that you are loved, and you matter and you're important, because that shame tells you the absolute opposite. It tells you no one cares about you. Why are you even here? You don't matter. You don't have a purpose. It tells you all these lies, and we're convinced they're true, and they're not. So it's important that we're combating that shame with truth. And finding that source of somebody that you listen to, even if you listen to these over and over and over. Go back to the Facebook page and listen to these when you're having a tough day. Journal, write it out. That helps you get perspective and clarity. It helps you and connect to your emotions. I know that's not, but you've got to process the pain. You've got to process the grief. Because you're going to want to do stuff to make it go away. And what you're doing is stunting the ability to heal.
Yeah. And that's, like I said, I just wanted to leave us with some kind of practical in the moment. Because again, I love the long game of mental health. I think it's so important, but we all know that sometimes it's a peak and valley, and you can do your work long-term all you want. But if in that moment I'm having a real bad day and I need some kind of, what would Kristen say type moments, and whether it be like, all right, she's encouraged me to turn off social media for the day, put on some Jimmy Buffett music and go for a walk. And you know what, if that's what gets you through the next couple hours, then kudos. Those are real practical steps that we want to equip you with until you can get to your next mental health appointment, if you're seeing in therapy or whatever that may be. But we know that's not always right here, right now. So what can we do right now? So I think that was an important conversation.
Yeah. And I think that's helpful because people long for nostalgia sometimes, like what once made them feel good. And you've got to connect to what feels good now in your nervous system.
Yeah.
And if sometimes that's a person that you're around, that your nervous system says, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Give yourself that permission. I mean, it's tough. Be aware of what your nervous system is telling you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. I talk about so many tips, man. This is unbelievable. I love this show because, like I said, hopefully people will go back and rewatch it over and over. It's applicable at any point in time on how do you solve your issues today. What can we work on right now? Number one, know yourself and self-reflect, and know self-awareness is key. I am always and learning something new about myself, because usually a lot of people remind me about it. And I've learned a lot of things about myself, and I'm trying to be better about that. So Kristen, you're amazing. Thanks so much. If somebody's in crisis mode though right now, I know you've already talked about some tips for that, but where could they turn?
So again, I can't emphasize 1-800-273-TALK. Memorize that, have it handy, use it with yourself or someone else that may need it. Prevail here in Noblesville. If you're in an abusive relationship, emotional, physical, sexual, it doesn't matter. Please reach out to Prevail. You can go to their website, and then there's a list of resources on the City of Noblesville website. It is packed full of resources. So please know there are free resources out there, and we think they're not. There are. There's tons of support groups. You don't have to walk through this alone. You do matter. You're important and you're loved. And I'm so happy you're either listening to this or you're with us today. And thank you so much for being here.
Yep. In the meantime, join us back here in 2 weeks for another awesome, riveting edition of Mental Health Monday. In the meantime, Kristen, thanks so much. And everybody stay safe.
Thanks.